The playground was eerily quiet until a tiny voice pierced the air. "Uncle, hit Mommy!" A little girl clutched the biker's arm, trembling, tears streaking her face. Tony, known in town for his rough exterior, froze. Rage and heartbreak collided inside him. Her mother, bruised and silent, avoided eye contact, ashamed. Tony's gang, his chosen family, exchanged grim glances. In that moment, Tony realized the depth of the pain children bear silently. He vowed justice, but not through anger alone. Redemption wasn't about vengeance. It was about protecting innocence and restoring broken bonds, no matter the cost. Tony gently knelt to the girl's level, feeling her tiny hands shake against his leather jacket. He tried to calm her, whispering that she was safe now, that she didn't have to be afraid. She buried her face in his chest, sobbing, and he felt a mix of fury and sorrow unlike anything he had known. Her mother finally looked up, her eyes red and swollen, and for a moment Tony saw a reflection of himself in her exhaustion and pain. He wanted to scream at the injustice, to punish the man who had hurt her, but he also knew that anger alone wouldn't fix what had been broken. The other bikers formed a protective circle around them, scanning the quiet park. They had faced danger before, but this was different. This wasn't about gang wars or stolen goods. This was about a little girl who had to grow up too fast, about a mother who had been silenced by fear, and about a man who had crossed a line that should never be crossed. Tony could feel the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders, heavier than any weight he had carried on the road before. He knew that every second counted. That hesitation could allow more pain to enter this child's life, and yet he had to act carefully. He remembered his own childhood, the nights when he had wanted someone to protect him, to step in when the world seemed cruel and unfair. The memory fueled him, a fire burning inside his chest. He stood, gently lifting the girl in his arms for comfort, and motioned for her mother to come closer. Her steps were hesitant, like she had forgotten how to trust, but Tony didn't rush her. He spoke softly, telling her that they could face this together, that she wasn't alone anymore. The fear in her eyes began to give way to something fragile, a hint of hope that perhaps she could fight back, that perhaps she could reclaim the life that had been taken from her in small, painful pieces. Tony's gang spread out, not in aggression but in vigilance, ensuring that the man who had caused this moment would not escape. They had the strength and presence of mind to contain him if necessary, but Tony's plan was never about a fistfight or revenge. Justice, he realized, could be more complicated than violence. It could mean confronting, making someone accountable, making them see the hurt they had caused and ensuring they understood that things could never go back to the way they were. Tony felt a deep sense of clarity. He had a mission now, one that went beyond fear or adrenaline, one that was about morality and care, about stepping up where the world had failed. The little girl clung to him tightly, her small arms wrapped around his neck, and he felt the fragility of life pressed into his chest. He whispered promises he didn't fully understand how to keep yet, promises of safety, of protection, of a world where she could laugh without fear. Her sobs quieted slightly as she heard his voice, steady and firm, and for a fleeting moment he felt a sense of purpose that transcended everything else he had ever known. Her mother knelt beside them, hesitant but slowly inching closer, allowing herself to be shielded by Tony's presence. The unspoken gratitude in her eyes was powerful enough to silence all the chaos and anger Tony had been carrying. Time seemed to stretch, every second amplified with emotion and consequence. Tony could see the faint outline of the man who had hurt them across the park. He was arrogant, thinking he could escape accountability, unaware that his actions had set off a chain of events that would not be ignored. Tony's eyes met the man's, a mixture of anger, disappointment, and calm resolution flashing in them. The man faltered, sensing that this was different than any conflict he had encountered before. This wasn't about proving toughness or asserting dominance. This was about righting a wrong, about restoring a sense of security and trust that had been violently ripped away. Tony slowly guided the girl's mother to stand firmly beside him, holding her hand in a silent gesture of reassurance. The little girl's eyes, wide and tearful, followed every movement, and Tony could feel her fear slowly melting into something closer to hope. The bikers closed the distance, forming a human barrier, and Tony took a step forward. His voice was firm but controlled as he addressed the man, making it clear that there would be consequences, that the time for hiding or denial was over. Every word was measured, every movement deliberate. The goal was not humiliation or punishment, but recognition, accountability, and ultimately, healing. The man seemed to hesitate, the arrogance fading as he finally faced the reality of what he had done. He could not escape the consequences. Not now. Not with these people standing firm. Not with the child's terrified voice echoing in his ears. Tony could feel the tension in the air, a mixture of fear, regret, and realization. The little girl clung to her mother as Tony watched the exchange, a strange pride swelling in his chest. Not pride of dominance, but pride in standing up for what was right, for creating a moment of safety and dignity amidst chaos. As the minutes passed, the situation began to resolve, not through fists or threats, but through presence, courage, and the weight of accountability. The mother held her daughter close, whispering reassurances and soothing words, her strength slowly returning. Tony watched, understanding that this moment, these 5 minutes of focused, intentional action, would echo for years in their lives. The little girl's sobs had faded into sniffles, and a tentative smile appeared on her mother's face. Tony realized that sometimes justice and redemption required patience, compassion, and the willingness to confront painful truths rather than lash out. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the park, but in that moment, it felt brighter than ever for Tony and his makeshift family. The little girl clutched his arm one last time, whispering, "Thank you, Uncle," and he felt something shift inside him. It was more than gratitude. It was recognition that what he had done mattered, that protecting the innocent, standing up for what was right, and offering the chance for healing was a form of redemption he hadn't thought he could achieve. He looked at his gang, who nodded in understanding, sharing the unspoken acknowledgement that they had done something meaningful beyond their usual life on the road. Tony knelt one final time to meet the little girl's gaze, smiling gently. "You're safe now," he told her, and for the first time in a long time, Tony allowed himself to feel hope, to feel that perhaps even someone like him could make a difference. Redemption, realization, family love, and sacrifice had all come together in these moments, binding them together in ways that would leave lasting marks, not scars, but signs of courage and care. The playground, once silent and filled with fear, now carried a quiet promise. Even in darkness, there could be protection, healing, and love. 5 minutes later, the bikers surrounded the man who had shattered a family's trust. He stood frozen, caught off guard, as the roar of engines faded into the tense silence of the park. Tony approached him slowly, his steps deliberate, radiating a calm authority that made the man shrink back slightly. This wasn't about intimidation or revenge. It was about accountability. Tony had seen too much pain, too much fear in the eyes of the little girl and her mother, to let anger dictate the moment. Instead, he guided the man toward a confrontation that would strip away excuses and force him to face the consequences of his actions. The man's bravado began to crumble as Tony spoke, his voice steady but edged with the weight of truth. He outlined the damage done, not as accusations meant to humiliate, but as undeniable facts the man could no longer deny. Tony's words were precise, cutting through the fog of denial and forcing the man to see the hurt he had caused. Every gesture, every command, was about creating a moment where the man could no longer hide behind anger, pride, or avoidance. This was about making him accountable in a way that could lead to change, not just punishment. The little girl stayed close to her mother, her tiny fingers gripping the fabric of her mother's shirt as if anchoring herself in safety. Her eyes, wide with both fear and curiosity, followed every movement. Tony noticed the subtle change in her posture, the easing of tension in her shoulders, as she began to sense that justice was being served in a way that didn't involve more violence or fear. The mother, her face still marked with pain and bruises, watched with tears streaming down her cheeks. She couldn't speak, couldn't move at first, but she felt the immense weight of relief beginning to seep in, knowing that her child was finally safe, and that the man who had caused this moment would have to answer for his actions. Tony's gang stayed nearby, silent and watchful, forming an unspoken barrier to ensure no one interfered with the confrontation. They had learned that real strength wasn't in striking first or in asserting dominance, but in controlling the moment, in channeling their presence to protect and guide. Each biker understood the significance of what was happening. They were not only witnessing a reckoning, but also participating in a form of justice that transcended violence, one that demanded reflection, acknowledgement, and the possibility of redemption. Tony outlined the steps the men would need to take. therapy to address the anger and issues that had led to this violence, restitution to begin repairing the tangible and intangible harm inflicted, and the slow, painstaking work of earning back his daughter's trust. The man flinched at each word, the gravity of the moment sinking in. This was no longer a threat or a warning. This was an ultimatum for personal accountability, a framework for change, and a path to redemption that he could not ignore. Tony's eyes held no hatred, only determination. He wanted this man to understand the depth of the consequences, not just for himself, but for the family he had harmed. The mother slowly approached, holding her daughter's hand tightly. Her voice quivered as she spoke to the man, recounting the moments of fear, pain, and helplessness she had endured. Every word cut through the air like a knife, but there was also an underlying plea, a hope that he could recognize the damage he had caused and make a conscious effort to repair it. The little girl wrapped her arms around her mother, resting her head on her shoulder. "It's okay now, Mommy," she whispered, and in that instant, Tony felt a quiet surge of triumph. This was the kind of justice that healed rather than destroyed, that rebuilt rather than tore apart. The man's face was pale, his hands trembling as he realized the enormity of the moment. Tony did not let him retreat into excuses or denial. Every argument he attempted was met with calm, firm reminders of the consequences of his actions. Tony's presence, along with the support of his gang, left no room for evasion. He could no longer pretend that his behavior had no impact, that the fear he had caused could be erased by avoidance. Tony made it clear that redemption was not optional. It was a responsibility that demanded effort, honesty, and sacrifice. Time seemed to stretch as the confrontation unfolded. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the park, but the intensity of the moment made everything else fade into the background. Tony stayed focused, ensuring that the man understood that this was not just about punishment, but about the opportunity to change, to make amends, and to rebuild what had been broken. The mother's tears continued to flow, her sobs quieted by her daughter's reassuring embrace, and Tony could feel the shift in the air, a tangible sense of hope that perhaps, after all this pain, healing was possible. The little girl looked up at Tony, her eyes still wide but now filled with trust and relief. She squeezed her mother's hand, feeling the warmth of safety and the certainty that they were no longer alone. Tony knelt down slightly, speaking softly to both of them, letting them know that they could rely on him and his gang for protection, for guidance, and for support. He wanted them to feel the permanence of this moment, to understand that they had a shield in him and in those who had chosen to stand beside him. The man, still trembling, finally nodded, a hesitant acknowledgement that he would comply with the steps laid out before him. There was no pride left in his expression, only a raw, vulnerable recognition of what he had done. Tony's voice softened slightly as he explained that the path forward would be difficult, that trust could not be rebuilt overnight, but that every effort mattered. This was the essence of redemption: acknowledgement, sacrifice, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. It was not glamorous, it was not instant, but it was transformative. As the tension slowly eased, the mother hugged her daughter tightly, whispering reassurances and soothing words, their bond strengthened by the ordeal they had endured. Tony stepped back slightly, watching the reunion, feeling the weight of relief and accomplishment settle in his chest. Justice had been served. But it was not the kind that left scars or fueled hatred. It was the kind that restored dignity, repaired trust, and created a foundation for love to flourish again. The little girl looked up at Tony one last time and smiled, a small but powerful gesture of gratitude and trust. Tony turned to his gang, who nodded in silent acknowledgement of what had been accomplished. They had seen violence, chaos, and conflict, but this moment was different. It was a reminder of why they stood together, why loyalty and protection mattered beyond the thrill of the road. They had witnessed a family begin to heal, a man forced to confront his failures, and a child reclaiming a sense of safety. The weight of that realization was profound, leaving a lasting mark on everyone present. The sun continued to set, casting a warm glow over the park, and Tony felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The bikers had delivered justice, but more importantly, they had restored love, dignity, and hope. Redemption, he realized, was not about dominance or punishment. It was about standing firm, offering second chances, and sacrificing pride to rebuild what was broken. Family, after all, was worth every ounce of effort, every moment of confrontation, and every sacrifice made along the way. And as the mother held her daughter close, whispering that it was finally okay, Tony knew that they had all witnessed something far greater than justice. They had witnessed the possibility of healing and the power of love.